I grew up in Paris, Missouri. It's just a really small town, lots of farms. Everybody kind of knows everybody. It's just a very small, rural community.
In the summer of 1994, 22-year-old Melanie Shepard is leading a hectic life, leaving her little time for romance.
I was going to school at College of the Ozarks. I was studying education. I wanted to be an English teacher. I was just really busy going to school and working. I was a cashier at a convenience store. I really didn't date that much.
Everything changes when a 28-year-old mechanic walks into the store one night. His name is James Addy.
There was a long line of people, and he was trying to check out, and he kind of yelled up to the front of the line, "Will you hurry up?" And I just kind of gave it right back to him. I said, "I'm doing the best I can." And he said, "Well, I'm cooking barbecue at my house." And I said, "I don't get any, I don't care." So later that night, he brought me some barbecue. And that's kind of how we met. I thought it was very sweet that he would go out of his way to do that for me. It was very nice. On a busy night, it was a nice surprise.
James returns to the store a week later, and this time, he's not buying groceries.
He asked me to come over, and that was our first date. He cooked supper for me. The food was good, and he's feeding me a lot. So that was kind of fun. We got to know each other pretty well, pretty fast. We both really liked each other. He just seemed like the kind of person that could take care of me and take care of himself and take care of a family. He seemed like husband material. Just a total package, you know?
Not long after they start dating, James drops a bombshell.
He shares with her that he's been married 3 times. So that's kind of shocking for Melanie. 3 times by 28, that's a lot.
He said they were cheaters. They were unfaithful and not good people. They were just gold diggers and trying to take advantage of him and of his good nature and his goodwill.
Despite this awkward beginning, 6 months into the relationship, things are getting serious, and James pops the question.
They were sitting on the couch talking, and he just sort of blurted out, "Will you marry me?"
I said, yes, of course. At that age, you want fairy tales and romance and happy endings. It was fun going to pick out a ring and being engaged. Felt like a grown-up. I felt very confident that I was with a good person. I was with the right person, and he wanted the same things that I did.
In the spring of 1995, James and Melanie get married. The newlyweds seem destined for a happy family life and soon welcome 2 kids.
Just had our perfect little family, 1 boy and 1 girl. I am a nurturing person, and I want to take care of my kids, and I want to take care of my husband, and I want to take care of my house. I think he saw that, yeah, that would work. That would work for him. That would work as a wife and good partner in life. I think that's what he wanted. He was a strong person. He was the protector and very capable of handling life. He was definitely the leader of the family. He took care of business.
In 2004, James takes on a higher-paying job as a prison guard, 30 miles away at the Moberly Correctional Center.
He really liked his job. He really did well in his job. He had no problem telling people what to do or being that aggressive person if he had to be. He could keep people in line. I think it was a real ego boost for him to have people listen to him and jump when he said jump. And then he expected it to happen at home, too. He wanted to have someone just follow along with whatever he said. It was tough because I'm not a prisoner. He didn't like that I had my own opinions, and he would get upset.
After 8 years of marriage and with her children now in school, Melanie looks to pursue her teaching career. But James puts his foot down.
He didn't want me to work. He didn't want me to go back to school. He kept saying, oh no, you need to stay at home. You need to stay at home. He just didn't want me out in the world and, come home and talk about my coworkers and talk about my job. He didn't want that. He wanted me to be focused solely on him. And he got very upset with me. He said I don't support him, and it was a big problem. It was a huge fight. That was very unexpected. I thought we were a team. I thought, we were building this life together, and I was supposed to just leave everything behind and just be his wife now. I didn't like that.
The arguments only get worse. For someone who craves control, James starts losing it.
He could get so mad that he would be threatening and intimidating and throw things. I can remember going through a lot of salt and pepper shakers. I would always just stand there because I don't want to be intimidated. I don't like that feeling. I don't like backing down from that.
11 years into the marriage and desperate for a sense of independence, Melanie finally defies James.
I started working. I was a substitute teacher, which was perfect while the kids were in school. It felt like this is where I should be. This is what I wanted to do. And it was nice to get out. I always said I liked being a stay-at-home mom, but I liked when it ended too. I liked a new thing to do.
For James, I think it was probably very scary. She has priorities and parts of her life that don't center around him anymore. I think at this point in time, James realizes that maybe Melanie is not going to be the submissive wife that he wants.
6 years into his job at the prison, James's work has strangely become all-consuming, and he disappears for longer lengths of time.
He would leave about 5:30 in the morning. It only takes 45 minutes to get there. So he left pretty early. And then he wouldn't get home till about 5 at night. That's 2 hours after his shift ended. I would just question him, why are you always so late? And he was angry with me. He's like, why can't you leave me alone? He would just say, well, I stopped and talked to people, or I went to get gas. Sometimes he'd have to wait on a train to go by. He had all these little excuses. So it was just odd.
There's a reason James is spending longer hours away from home, and it has nothing to do with work. He's spending more and more time with one of the other guards. Her name is Molly Watson.
Molly wanted to get a job that could make pretty good money that she could save back for her and her son, so she could go back to school. And so she started out at the Moberly prison. Her ultimate goal was to be a psychologist.
Molly needs the money, as she's a single mom, raising her son on her own.
Molly was a really good mom. She gave him all the love in the world.
I am very much a huge geek. I hate being called a nerd.
I wanted Molly to find somebody that respected her for her, that treated her like she deserved to be treated,
In 2011, just a year into her new job, Molly has started dating someone new, and she's excited to introduce him to her brother.
When I first met him, I just kind of looked at him and I was like, hi, I'm Tim. And he's just like, yeah, I'm James. And he put his head down. Just something about him, I didn't like him from the get-go. He was very standoffish. He would never look you in the eye to talk to you. He didn't really seem to care.
James's off-putting demeanor likely raised questions as to who he was, what were his intentions, and really, what was he hiding?
Just something was off about him. I knew there's something not right about this guy.
In 2011, Melanie and James Addy have been married for 16 years. Across town, Molly Watson has fallen hard for the same James Addy.
She adored him. She doted on him. She loved him unconditionally. She made James her #1 priority, and that's what James was looking for. He wanted somebody who put him first, always.
Molly's family is less than impressed with this new man in her life, who's 16 years her senior.
Molly told me he was in the process of getting a divorce, for 6 years, that he had like 2 kids.
He says that he's trying to be there for his kids and do what's best for them, so he's still living with his estranged wife.
I thought that was weird, I've been divorced and I wouldn't live with my ex-wife.
James visits Molly almost every day after work at her parents' house. They spend all their time together in her bedroom.
Molly is living at home with her parents. She's very close with her family. He's not making any attempts to really build a relationship with them. And so it just seems like there's secrets and there's something that's just not right.
He would try to keep her away from everybody. James would try to separate Molly from her son. You could always tell that he did not want Molly's son in their life at all. My dad didn't like him. My mom flat out told me, I don't like the guy. And it killed me to watch my sister keep dating him because, I knew she could do better.
Molly is so enamored with James, she brushes her family's concerns aside.
She was in love. Love is blind, and in her case, that's the truth. You could point out things to her that were obvious, and just, she would deny it.
In 2016, 5 years into their relationship, Molly and James take their first trip together.
He received a phone call from one of his friends. He got off the phone and I said, "What was that about?" And he said, "Oh, he wants me to go to Mexico with him."
Melanie encourages him to go with his coworkers and have a good time. In reality, James wasn't going with coworkers. He was going to Mexico with Molly, his secret girlfriend. For Molly, this was amazing. She wanted to go on a vacation with James so badly. She was madly in love with him, and this was just an opportunity for them to grow their relationship and spend more time together.
It looked like when they started to go on vacation that they were more committed to each other. Like he was maybe getting serious about it. We've had the doubts about him, but okay. Maybe this is good.
When James returns home a week later, Melanie notices something odd about his photos.
I said, "Well, where are the other people that you went with?" And he said, "Oh, I don't want pictures of them." So there was only pictures of him and the resort and the beach. And that's all I saw.
A year later, unbeknownst to Melanie, James takes her to the same vacation spot where he took Molly.
It was so nice. We just had each other and we spent all our time together, and it was a great trip. We had so much fun.
At this point, James has been carrying on this double life for so long that he's gotten so used to it and comfortable, to the point where he's arrogant enough to take his wife on the same vacation he took his mistress.
In October 2017, when James lies and tells Molly his divorce is finalized, she's ready to take the next step.
The only thing she told me about the proposal was that she'd asked James to marry her, and he said yes. Molly looked really happy. You could tell that she was ready to get married.
Now he's got to figure out what he's going to do because he still has a wife.
Molly quickly busies herself prepping for her dream wedding. She picks April 29th, 2018 as the date, and she's planning to hold it at the Stony Creek Hotel, where Samantha Cohen is their wedding planner.
She had a smile on her face the entire time we would meet. She just had, this look in her eye of like, this is my day, I'm so excited, let's make this happen. She wanted to be the princess for the day. Every girl imagines their wedding day and wanting to be the bride or the princess walking down the aisle.
That's what she wanted, find Prince Charming and settle down happily ever after. But I thought, what's she thinking, she don't want to marry this guy. Nothing good can come of it.
During the Christmas holidays, just a few months before the wedding is to take place, James shares some devastating news with Molly.
He tells Molly that his ex-wife Melanie has been in a terrible car accident. She's actually on life support. And he needs to be there for his children and to help them with the care of their mother.
Molly felt bad for James, told him, if he needed her to back off any, and give him some space, she would, and that she was there for him, whatever he needed, that she understood he was doing it for his kids. I think it made Molly feel guilty about the wedding coming up.
Is Melanie's supposed accident a strategy for James to get out of the wedding? Melanie, in fact, is alive and well, for now. But soon, she will come perilously close to death.
There's this really strong gas smell in our bedroom.
I believe that Melanie was at a very high risk of being killed.
To think that you're so close to losing your life, it's terrifying. It was late at night, midnight, 1 o'clock. I woke up and I smelled gas. It was very, very strong in the bedroom. I thought, well, this is not dissipating. This is not normal. And Jim wasn't there. He wasn't in our bed. He wasn't in the bathroom. So I got up and I went to find Jim to tell him that there's this really strong gas smell.
She goes downstairs and she finds that all the windows and doors are closed.
Jim wasn't anywhere in the house. And I thought, this could be serious. This particular night, he was outside on the deck, smoking a cigarette. It was unusual for him to be outside smoking. He would usually just smoke in the dining room at the window. So I told him, I said, really strong gas smell, I don't know what it is. He said, okay, well, you stay out here. And he went back in the bedroom and opened the windows and just said, I don't know, it's probably some farm equipment outside.
But it's a little suspicious because the windows are closed, and when she goes outside, she doesn't have this overpowering odor anymore.
Eventually, the smell did go away, and I was able to go back to bed, so I don't have an explanation for that. It was so strange.
While Melanie worries about James and his odd behavior, Molly Watson is blissfully anticipating her fairy tale wedding. After 7 years of dating James, her dream is finally coming true.
Her excitement was so palpable. I mean, you watch her videos and she just radiates excitement and love.
Hi everyone, it's Molly, and here is the dress on me, and I have to say I was actually really impressed.
You can tell just by talking to her, she has always dreamt of her wedding. I mean, she had 3 wedding dresses. Like, this was not just any normal day in her life. She's been dreaming of how this wedding was gonna look for years. I think she finally found, her Prince Charming, and this was the next chapter of her life.
Molly seems unaware that James lacks the same enthusiasm, but his detached demeanor is obvious to others.
When I was meeting with James and Molly, it was all Molly giving the input. He really just sat there kind of staring off into space. He was a very quiet man, didn't smile often, and just kind of was there. He didn't really give much input into the conversations, and he just didn't seem like he really wanted to be there. He didn't seem to care.
He said, oh, well, we're getting married, as long as it shuts her up, whatever. That's kind of his attitude towards it.
On April 22nd, just a week before the wedding, James drops another bombshell about his supposed ex-wife.
We were told she was in this coma, and they determined that she would never recover from her injuries. From what Molly told me directly, Melanie's life support, they were going to go ahead and pull the plug because they decided that she was too brain damaged and that they were going to have to just let her go.
I, reached out to Molly to get a final in-person meeting scheduled with her and James, and she had emailed me back saying, I don't know if James will be able to make the meeting as his ex-wife had just passed away that weekend before.
James is lying, and Melanie is still very much alive, unbeknownst to Molly and everyone else around her.
I think James wanted so badly to get out of this predicament he had created that he was hoping by creating this tragic situation and backstory that maybe Molly would come to the conclusion to cancel the wedding, and that would sort of be his get out of jail free card. But that's not what happened. He needed to keep up this charade as the loving fiance, and so he doesn't cancel the wedding because he knows that's going to devastate her.
2 days before the wedding, James still hasn't told Molly the truth.
That Friday when he came in by himself after dropped everything off and paid, I asked him, how are you feeling? And the only words that he said was that she was driving him crazy.
It's probably pretty common for grooms to be a little annoyed with brides as it gets close to the wedding. But for James, I think Molly was driving him crazy because he knew the walls were closing in. He was still married to Melanie, and he had to figure something out quickly.
The night of April 27th, Molly abruptly leaves her parents' home without much of an explanation.
She was actually making something to eat when suddenly she got a phone call. And after that phone call, Molly leaves really quickly. And she just sort of rushed out of the house. Given that she was cooking, her parents felt like she would be back really quickly.
At his home, James tells his wife Melanie he's stepping out.
He was out in the garage, and then he came in and said he was going to go to a friend's house. This was about 7 o'clock, and then I went to bed about 7:30. I usually go to bed pretty early.
Later that night, a driver on a deserted road notices something unusual.
He sees these 2 vehicles parked on the side of the road. He figures one of them is having engine trouble, so he stops to see if he can help. An older man tells him that everything's fine, he can go. And so he proceeds on his way. On his way back, he passes the same spot, only this time there's only one vehicle.
The Monroe County Sheriff's Office got a call around 10:30 at night that a passerby named Glenn McSparron had found a woman in a very remote area of Monroe County on a low water crossing. He told police that there was a woman who was laying in front of a car on this dusty, dirty country road. Her eyes were open. She did not appear alive to him.
Investigators rush to the scene.
Police quickly identify the cause of death as a gunshot wound to the head. This woman is out in the middle of nowhere, and she's been shot execution style. It leads them to believe this was a planned murder, and someone lured her out there. And they identify her by finding a marriage license on her passenger seat that identifies her as Molly Watson, who's engaged to be married to James Addy.
In the early hours of April 28th, just one day before Tim Watson's sister is to be married, he gets a call from his dad.
As soon as I saw what time it was, I knew it was something serious. He said, "Timmy, the highway patrol just left our house. They found Molly dead on this dirt road." And immediately I was in shock.
About 2:30 in the morning, I got up and I looked out the window and there were 4 vehicles with flashing lights. I went to the door and Jim was there first. He opened the door for these 4 cops. So I asked them, "What's going on? Why are you here?" And nobody would answer me. Finally, somebody asked me, he said, "Who are you?" And I pointed to Jim and said, "Well, I'm his wife." And Jim said, "Yes, that's my wife." And then the mood kind of changed a little bit.
Investigators had no idea what they were walking into. They thought they were making a death notification to a fiancé, and they find out he's already married for 23 years. They discovered Melanie Addy, and everything changed. Suddenly, James Addy, who they expected to be the bereaved fiancé who would surely receive the worst news of his entire life, was now a suspect.
Detectives escort James into the dining room for an interview, while another investigator asks Melanie curious questions.
Where were you tonight? What did you do tonight? Do you know Molly Watson? She's been found dead. I didn't know who that was. I didn't know who Molly was. I didn't know how she was at all related to my family. They told me who Molly was and that they were going to get married. I asked him, do you have the right person? Are you sure you have the right person? Because that's my husband. I was numb. I was in shock. It was hard to get this through my head because this was my husband and this was our life, and this other person had no place in it, and the story did not make sense.
Out of Melanie's earshot, James comes clean to the officers about his relationship with Molly.
He admitted the affair and said that it had been going on for 7 years.
He tells them, though, that he had absolutely nothing to do with Molly's death.
They asked him where he was that evening. James Addy responded that he left the home around 7 o'clock to go visit a friend. He said the friend was not home, so he turned around and came back home and arrived around 8:30 that evening, and that he went to bed shortly thereafter.
Did James go to bed as he claims to police, or did he secretly meet Molly? When forensics examined the bride-to-be's computer, they find evidence to suggest she had been obsessed by one thing in the 24 hours leading up to her death. And it wasn't her wedding.
Molly Watson had been searching for evidence of Melanie Addy's death. She was searching to see if there was an obituary or any evidence of this horrible accident that had eventually led to Melanie's death. Of course, Melanie Addy was very much alive, and she was unable to find any evidence that she had passed away.
Did Molly come to the crushing realization that Melanie was alive and there would be no wedding?
I think she questioned James on it, and at that point, he knew the jig was up and he had to do something.
Back at the murder scene, investigators scour the area and find Molly's cell phone and a discarded t-shirt. Police also go through Molly's phone records and are able to piece together her last known movements.
The last phone call she ever made was 22 minutes long. 22 minutes, which is the exact amount of time it took Molly Watson to drive from her home to her death. The entire time she was on the phone with James Addy.
I think somehow he convinced her to meet up with him so they could talk about it, and he got her out in the middle of nowhere and took her life.
Police looked at the victimology of Molly Watson. Who did she know? Who in her life might want her dead? And they determined that only one person, James Addy, had the motive, means, and opportunity to take Molly's life.
James Addy is arrested and taken into custody. The next day, Melanie starts looking for evidence of James's double life.
I went out to the garage, which was kind of his domain. It was a lot of storage things that we kept up there, a lot of boxes. And I started looking a little closer at the boxes, and these were not my things. These were Molly's things. They had her name on the boxes. And that's when I found the photo album of them on vacation. And a lot of kitchen stuff, just household things that were at my house. She was planning on moving in, I guess. It was very overwhelming. I didn't know how to process this. He was home every night. I don't know when he saw her or how they formed a relationship over 7 years and why he would go forward with marrying her or planning this wedding when he was still married to me. How is this supposed to work? I don't know what he was thinking. I was just angry, just angry.
Melanie thinks back to the night of the gas leak and is left to wonder about James's possible intentions. The thought is chilling.
I started to put all of that together about the gas in the bedroom. I think the idea was for me not to wake up. I think I was supposed to die. I think he was trying to get rid of one of us.
Had James tried to kill Melanie but failed, so he chose Molly instead? James Addy has been arrested and charged with first-degree murder in the death of Molly Watson. A heartbroken Melanie confronts her husband.
I went to the jail a few days after he was arrested and asked him, what the hell? What are you doing? This is our life. And he didn't have any answers. He apologized for the affair. He never admitted that he killed her. He said that he was sorry and he didn't know we had such a perfect life. Too late now. He lost everything and he knew it. He knew everything was gone. He knew I wasn't going to stick around. I was not going to be his support system anymore. This was it. We were done. James's
case goes before the court in the spring of 2021. Prosecutors paint a picture for the jury of what they believe happened that fateful night.
The night of April 27th, I believe that he called Molly Watson and told her to get in her car and start driving to this remote area. She arrived at the low water crossing, opened the door, and he shot her once, and he panicked. He left Molly's body there for anyone to find. Going into the trial, we felt that the evidence against James Addy was overwhelming.
The T-shirt found by police is a key piece of evidence.
In addition to the T-shirt having gunshot residue on it and the victim's blood on it, there was something else important about the T-shirts. That T-shirt had been made by James Addy's daughter, Emma Addy.
And this was specific to Emma. She had made this shirt and kind of messed up the design a little bit.
She was able to identify that T-shirt as one that she had made and given to her father. So the T-shirt was extremely important because we know it came from the crime scene because it had Molly's blood on it. And we know that it came from the defendant's home.
James had told police that on the night of the murder, he'd gone out but was home by 8:30 p.m. His daughter, though, contradicts that story when faced with the daunting task of testifying against her own father.
Emma Addy was interviewed about her father's whereabouts, and she gave a very different story.
I was still up doing homework at around 10 p.m., and that's around the time that Dad came home.
He returns home and sees his daughter Emma still up. He's a little surprised, and Emma described him as being nervous. James gets in the shower right away. And Emma also notices that her dad does laundry, something that would normally be her mom's job.
And did you smell anything? Yes, I smelled bleach.
Emma Addy's testimony was key to dispute the alibi that James Addy had provided to the police. And to be able to come into court and to tell the world that your father lied to the police, it was incredible.
She had a tough job and she handled it. She did really, really well. She's an inspiration to me. She is. She's amazing.
I just plead with the jury to give this monster the max sentence possible.
On April 28th, 2021, what would have been Molly and James' third anniversary had they been married, James Addy is found guilty of Molly's murder.
I hereby sentence you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole.
I just wanted justice for Molly. That's all I cared about. You know, as long as I heard those words guilty come out of the judge's mouth, and thank God they did.
He had the means, he had the motive. He didn't have a good alibi. He wasn't home that night. So it all kind of added up. He's absolutely responsible for this.
James Addy is convicted, but it's still hard to comprehend his sickening actions.
It's unfathomable that James thought the solution to the problem was to kill someone instead of just breaking up with them. In his mind, that was the right thing to do, and that's what's scary. It's terrifying that that is his way out.
Had he have walked away, just never talked to her again, we'd be fine with that. You know, she'd be upset. She'd still be here. He chose to take her life. He's an evil person.
It's tragic to think that somebody who was so excited to be a bride and to have a happily ever after instead had this tragic ending.
The family, they're the ones that suffer in this. They are the true victims. They've lost Molly, and they will lose her, you know, at family get-togethers and holidays and vacations, and she's just not there for them.
She definitely knows how much I love her. I would like Molly to be remembered as the sweet, loving, giving person she was. She'd do anything for anybody.
I'd hug her and just say how sorry I am that this happened to her. And I hope she feels that justice has been served. And I hope she's okay.
I still go out to her gravesite and I have conversations with her, and she said everything's fine, everything's okay.
As for Melanie, she has found a semblance of peace in her life.
It's good that it's finally over. I'm divorced and on my own, but I'm much happier on my own than I was married. I'm good all by myself, I really am. I'm just really lucky that I have a good job, a fun job, great coworkers. I have a good life. I'm happy.
The vast, seemingly endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean has long served as a natural barrier, isolating the islands of Polynesia from the rapid, industrializing momentum of the Western world. In the early 20th century, this geographical remoteness was not merely a matter of distance, but a profound separation of cultures, systems, and philosophies of governance. It is within this profound isolation that we find American Samoa in the year 1921, a territory operating under a unique and often unyielding administrative structure. Unlike the mainland United States, where the gears of the justice system turn slowly, grinding through layers of appeals, civilian juries, and constitutional debates, American Samoa was governed entirely by the United States Navy. This was a military administration, absolute in its authority and severe in its execution of order. The naval governor held supreme power, encompassing the executive, legislative, and, most crucially for our story, judicial branches. There was no separation of powers here, no intricate appellate courts to pause the fatal stroke of a judge's pen. In this sun-drenched, remote corner of the world, justice was not blind. It was wearing a military uniform, and its defining characteristic was an overwhelming, terrifying swiftness. When we examine the history of jurisprudence, we often look for milestones, for precedent-setting moments that redefine how society governs itself and punishes its transgressors. Usually, these milestones are forged in grand courthouses after years of meticulous legal battles. But the story we are stepping into today did not unfold in a marble-lined courtroom in Washington. It took place in the quiet, tropical surroundings of Vaitogi Village, a place defined by its tight-knit community and traditional rhythms of life. Yet, what happened in Vaitogi in the summer of 1921 would ripple across the ocean, challenging the very foundation of American constitutional rights and drawing the attention of the highest office in the land. This is the story of the first execution ever carried out by the American Naval Administration in Samoa. It is a narrative that forces us to confront the terrifying reality of a legal system stripped of its safety nets, where the time between a tragic loss of life and the unceremonious dropping of the gallows floor was a mere 26 days. To understand the gravity of this case, we must first center our attention on the victim, a man named Sake. Sake was a resident of Lyon, a prominent village with its own rich history, but on the 5th of June, 1921, his path led him to Vaitogi. The details of Sake's life leading up to this fateful day remain largely overshadowed by the sheer administrative violence of what followed, but it is essential to remember that he was a man breathing the humid air of the South Pacific, participating in the daily social fabric of his community. He was a son of the islands, completely unaware that his final moments would be dictated by a petty dispute and that his death would become the catalyst for a dark, unprecedented chapter in Samoan legal history. Sake's demise was not the result of a grand political assassination or a long-simmering blood feud. It was born from one of the most common and destructive human vices, a disagreement over gambling. In the secluded villages of 1920 Samoa, much like anywhere else in the world, impromptu gatherings for gambling were a part of the social dynamic. Money exchanged hands, fortunes briefly shifted, and tensions could easily rise in the heat of a game. It was within the confines of such a gambling setting in Vaitogi that a severe monetary dispute erupted between Sake and another local man named Topu. The precise nature of the words exchanged, the exact amount of the debt, or the specific game being played are less important than the psychological breaking point that was reached. Topu, having lost money or finding himself burdened by a gambling debt to Sake, was consumed by a sudden, violent rage. This was not a calculated, premeditated plot constructed over weeks. It was an explosive, blinding anger rooted in financial humiliation and interpersonal conflict. The trajectory of this anger shifted the dispute from a heated argument into a grim historical inevitability. Topu, unable to reconcile his losses and overwhelmed by his fury, made a decision that would end 2 lives. He left the immediate vicinity of the dispute, walking away from the gambling area and heading back to his residence. This brief journey could have been a cooling-off period, a moment for the humid breeze to clear his mind, but instead, it was a march of grim determination. Upon reaching his home, Topu retrieved a shotgun. The introduction of this firearm into the narrative drastically altered the stakes. A shotgun is a weapon of devastating close-range power, a tool not meant for precision but for undeniable destruction. Armed with this weapon, Topu transformed from a disgruntled gambler into an active hunter within his own community. He returned to the pathways of Veitogi, aggressively scouring the village for Sake. The tension in the village must have been palpable as Topu, driven by anger and holding a lethal weapon, stalked through the area. When he finally located Sake, there was no drawn-out confrontation, no opportunity for intervention or mediation. Topu discharged the shotgun at close range. The blast was final and devastating, ending Sake's life abruptly and violently. The suddenness of the murder shattered the peace of Veitogi, leaving a community to grapple with the brutal reality of the violence that had just unfolded on their doorstep. Sake, a man from Lyon who had simply been participating in a local game, was dead, his life extinguished over a momentary conflict regarding money. However, the tragedy of Sake's murder is only the first half of this dark historical episode. While the taking of a human life is always a profound tragedy, the machinery of the state that activated in the immediate aftermath is what cemented this case in the annals of legal infamy. In an ordinary civilian jurisdiction, the arrest of Topu would have triggered a long, methodical process. There would be grand juries, pretrial motions, extensive psychiatric evaluations, and a trial that could easily stretch into months or years. The defense would have the opportunity to dissect the evidence, question the state of mind of the accused, and perhaps argue for a lesser charge based on the spontaneous nature of the crime. Furthermore, a conviction carrying the ultimate penalty of death would automatically trigger years of mandatory appeals, ensuring that the state was absolutely certain before taking a life. But this was American Samoa in 1921, under the uncompromising grip of the United States Navy. The naval authorities, representing the absolute law of the land, moved with a speed that is difficult to comprehend through a modern legal lens. The entire concept of due process, the foundational American legal principle that the state must respect all legal rights owed to a person, was practically non-existent for the indigenous population under this military framework. From the moment the fatal shot echoed through Veitogi on June 5th, a merciless countdown began. There was no prolonged investigation, no complex forensic analysis, and certainly no agonizing over the philosophical implications of capital punishment. The guilt of Topu was established rapidly, and the sentence of death was handed down with chilling efficiency. Exactly 26 days later, on the 1st of July, 1921, the Naval Administration executed Topu by hanging. 26 days. In less than a month, a man committed a murder, was apprehended, tried, sentenced, and had his life terminated by the state. The gallows were erected, the rope was prepared, and the first execution under American naval rule in Samoa was carried out with military precision. This hyper-accelerated timeline represents a profound failure of the concept of justice. It was a demonstration of absolute power, a clear message from the naval authorities that order would be maintained with swift, lethal consequences. But in its haste, the system stripped away the fundamental rights of the accused to a fair, deliberate hearing and the vital opportunity for appellate review. Topu was dead before the reality of his crime could be fully processed by a proper legal mechanism. The sheer velocity of this execution did not go unnoticed. While the naval administration in Pago Pago may have felt they were simply administering efficient justice, the echoes of the hanging reached far beyond the shores of the Pacific. When news of the 26-day turnaround from murder to execution reached the mainland United States, it caused a severe shockwave in legal circles. Specifically, a lawyer based in California learned of the events that transpired in Vaitogi. Appalled by what he recognized as a gross violation of fundamental human rights and a complete mockery of due process, this attorney felt compelled to act. He understood that while American Samoa was a distant territory, it was still under the jurisdiction of the United States, and the constitutional principles that govern the mainland should not be completely discarded at the edge of the empire. This righteous indignation culminated in a formal, vehemently worded letter of complaint directed to the highest authority in the American government. The California lawyer drafted a detailed petition outlining the staggering lack of procedural safeguards in Topu's case and sent it directly to the Oval Office. It is a common historical misconception that this letter was received by Calvin Coolidge, but in the summer of 1921, the man sitting behind the resolute desk was President Warren G. Harding. The letter to President Harding was a scathing indictment of the naval administration's totalitarian grip on American Samoa. It argued that by denying Topu a fair trial and the minimal opportunity for an appeal, the Navy had not just executed a murderer, they had executed the very concept of American justice on the island. This singular piece of correspondence, arriving in Washington, D.C. long after Topu's body had been buried, could not reverse the tragic events of June and July. It could not bring Sake back to life, nor could it untie the hangman's knot. However, it served as a crucial historical marker. The execution of Topu and the subsequent outcry became a glaring stain on the record of the naval administration. It forced a spotlight onto the unchecked power of the naval governors and ignited the first serious conversations about the necessity of legal reform in the territory. The absolute authority that allowed a man to be hanged just 26 days after committing a crime began to look less like efficient governance and more like martial tyranny. As we delve deeper into the specifics of the investigation, the trial, and the lingering shadows of this unprecedented execution, we must keep our focus on the collision of human frailty and absolute power. We must remember Sake, the victim whose life was violently cut short, and we must critically examine a system that believed justice could be adequately served in less than a month. The story of Vaitogi is a dark mirror reflecting the dangers of swift retribution, setting the stage for a meticulous examination of how this tragedy unfolded step by step. To truly comprehend the weight of the tragedy that unfolded on the 5th of June, 1921, we must first immerse ourselves in the environment that birthed it. The island of Tutuila, the main landmass of American Samoa, is a place of staggering, almost overwhelming natural beauty. Deep emerald mountains rise sharply from the cobalt waters of the South Pacific, their peaks often shrouded in a thick, humid mist. In the early 20th century, this landscape was a world entirely unto itself. The villages dotted along the coastline were connected by narrow footpaths and the ever-present ocean, dictating a rhythm of life that had remained largely unchanged for centuries. It was a society deeply rooted in the Fa Samoa, the traditional Samoan way of life, where communal harmony, respect for elders, and the authority of village chiefs formed the bedrock of daily existence. Yet, superimposed over this ancient, intricate social fabric was a completely alien structure of absolute power. The United States Navy had established a coaling station in the deep, sheltered harbor of Pago Pago in the late 19th century, and by 1921, the entire territory was under rigid military administration. This was not a democratic governance. The naval governor, a military officer appointed by Washington, wielded an extraordinary concentration of power, acting simultaneously as the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of the government. In this breathtakingly beautiful isolation, the strict, uncompromising discipline of a military vessel had been cast over an ancient Polynesian society, creating a quiet but profound underlying tension. Within this complex tapestry lived a man named Sake. History, often written by the victors and the administrators, rarely preserves the intimate details of ordinary men, leaving us with only the broadest strokes of his existence. What we know with absolute certainty is that Sake was a resident of Lyon. To understand Sake, one must understand Lyon. Situated on the southwestern coast of Tutuila, Lyon was not just another settlement. It was a village of immense historical and cultural significance. It was known as the ancient capital of the island, a place where the first Christian missionaries had successfully landed and established their presence decades earlier. The people of Lyon carried a distinct pride, a sense of heritage tied to their prominent role in the island's history. Sake would have grown up amidst the sprawling stone churches and the large, open-sided meeting houses known as fails, steeped in a culture that valued eloquent speech, deep familial connections, and a profound respect for the social hierarchy. His daily life would have been dictated by the predictable, comforting cycles of the tropics, fishing in the reef, tending to crops, and participating in the communal obligations that defined a Samoan man's worth. He was, by all available accounts, an ordinary man navigating the changing tides of his world, an individual whose existence was tightly woven into the vast, protective net of his extended family and his village. Yet, human existence is rarely confined to a single geographical point, and the social dynamics of 1920s Samoa encouraged movement and interaction between neighboring communities. For reasons that remain buried in the unrecorded moments of that fateful week, Sake traveled eastward along the rugged coastline from his home in Lyon to the village of Veitogi. The journey itself would have been a testament to the physical endurance required in that era, walking under the heavy, oppressive tropical sun or navigating the unpredictable coastal waters in a small boat. Veitogi presented a different atmosphere from the historic, bustling center of Lyon. It was a village perched on dramatic, black volcanic cliffs that relentlessly absorbed the punishing blows of the open Pacific Ocean. The relentless crashing of the waves against the ancient rock provided a constant, deafening soundtrack to village life. Veitogi was famous throughout the islands for a captivating local legend regarding a blind woman and her granddaughter who had transformed into a turtle and a shark, a myth that imbued the village with a sense of mystery and deep spiritual resonance. It was within this specific environment, a place of dramatic natural forces and enduring folklore, that Sake arrived, completely unaware that he had crossed the threshold into the final days of his life. The reason for Sake's presence in Veitogi converges on a common, universal human pastime that transcends cultural boundaries and geographical isolation. He found himself engaged in a local gambling circle. In the remote villages of the South Pacific during the early 20th century, gambling was far more than a simple diversion. It was a complex social ritual. Without the modern distractions of electricity, broad communication networks, or mechanized entertainment, villagers often gathered in the dense, humid shade of the tropical canopy or within the cool confines of a traditional fail to engage in games of chance. These gatherings were intensely social events, a release valve for the physical pressures of subsistence, living, and a forum for male bonding and competition. The games, likely involving rudimentary cards or simple local mechanics of chance, were played with a fierce intensity. Men would sit cross-legged on woven pandanus mats, the air thick with the smell of burning coconut husks and the quiet, tense murmurs of calculation and anticipation. Crucially, gambling in this era was inextricably linked to the shifting economic realities of American Samoa. The traditional barter system, based on the exchange of fine mats, agricultural produce, and woven goods, was slowly being infiltrated by the concept of hard currency brought by the American naval presence. Cash was relatively scarce, and therefore, it carried a disproportionate psychological weight. It represented access to imported goods, a newly minted form of social status, and a tangible measure of a man's fortune. When money was placed on the woven mats in Veitogi, it was not merely a casual wager. It was an investment of pride and a test of social standing. The atmosphere in these circles could oscillate wildly between boisterous camaraderie and sharp, localized hostility. A winning streak could elevate a man's prestige within the hour, while a losing streak could lead to profound embarrassment and a desperate, gnawing need to reclaim lost honor. Sake, far from his home in Lyon, was participating in this high-stakes social theater. We can imagine him there, a visitor in Vaetogi, perhaps trying to assert his presence or simply caught up in the infectious, universal thrill of the game. The heat of the June afternoon would have been pressing down on the village, matching the rising temperature within the gambling circle itself. In this environment, the concept of a debt takes on a dangerous dimension. A gambling debt is not like a formal loan documented by banks and secured by assets. It is an immediate, highly personal obligation. It is a promise made in the raw, emotional crucible of the game, and the failure to honor it, or the dispute over its very existence, is often perceived as a direct attack on a man's character and integrity. The stakes were fundamentally tied to masculinity and respect in a society where public perception was everything. It is in this volatile, emotionally charged atmosphere that the shadow of another man, Topu, begins to lengthen across the narrative. Topu was a local of Vaetogi, a man on his home turf, surrounded by his own community and his own family ties. The details of Topu's background are as tragically sparse as Sake's, but his actions reveal a man deeply susceptible to the psychological pressures of the gambling circle. The intersection of Sake, the visitor from Lyon, and Topu, the local from Vaetogi, over a pile of disputed currency, was a localized spark in a village built on volcanic rock. The specific words that ignited the conflict are lost to history, swallowed by the roar of the ocean against the Vaetogi cliffs. We do not know if the dispute was over a misunderstanding of the rules, a perceived sleight of hand, or a simple refusal to pay a devastating loss. What we do know is that the disagreement shattered the fragile camaraderie of the gathering. The argument over money mutated rapidly into a vicious clash of egos. In the enclosed, intimate space of a village where everyone knows everyone else, public humiliation is a profound catalyst for violence. For Topu, losing face in front of his peers, potentially indebted to a man from another village, triggered a cascade of uncontrollable rage. The traditional mechanisms of dispute resolution in Samoan culture, which usually involved the intervention of older, respected chiefs known as matais who would mediate and restore harmony, utterly failed in this fleeting moment. The speed at which the dispute escalated outpaced any opportunity for communal de-escalation. The anger blinded Topu to the profound consequences of his next actions, severing his connection to reason and community order. As Sake remained in the vicinity of the gambling area, perhaps believing the dispute was just a heated moment that would eventually cool, the grim reality of the situation was actively taking shape elsewhere in the village. The geographical separation between the men in the immediate aftermath of the argument provided a false sense of security. Sake was a man simply existing in the aftermath of a mundane conflict, likely anticipating a return journey to Lyon, completely oblivious to the fact that his life had been irrevocably forfeit over a handful of coins or crumpled bills. He was anchored in the normalcy of a Sunday afternoon, surrounded by the familiar sounds of village life, the distant laughter of children, and the ever-present rhythm of the sea. He had no reason to suspect that the rigid, lethal machinery of military justice was about to be summoned by a senseless act of localized violence. The tragedy of Sake is the tragedy of a life interrupted in its most unremarkable moments. He is the anchor of this dark history, the human cost of a fleeting, furious decision. His death would soon become the catalyst for a legal process so terrifyingly swift that it would expose the severe vulnerabilities of a population living under absolute military rule. But before the gavels fell and the gallows were built, there was simply a man from Lyon, standing in the coastal village of Vaetogi, entirely unaware that the most dangerous element in his environment was not the crashing ocean or the steep cliffs, but the wounded pride of a fellow villager walking back toward his home. The collision of these two lives, set against the backdrop of an isolated island governed by an unyielding naval administration, was about to produce a shockwave that would forever alter the historical landscape of American Samoa. The afternoon sun on the 5th of June, 1921, cast long, heavy shadows across the village of Vaetogi. The intense heat of the day was beginning to break, normally signaling a time for the villagers to relax, to gather for the evening meal, and to let the cooling ocean breeze wash over the volcanic cliffs. But the atmosphere near the center of the village was fractured. The abrupt end to the gambling circle had left a palpable, vibrating tension in the air. Sake, the visitor from Lyon, remained in the vicinity, perhaps lingering under the shade of a breadfruit tree or conversing quietly with other men who had witnessed the sudden flare of anger. He was likely processing the confrontation, categorizing it as a fleeting outburst, a common byproduct of wounded male pride and lost wagers. In his mind, the dispute was a closed chapter of the afternoon. He was anchored in the present, feeling the solid earth beneath his feet, completely blind to the fact that his future had already been violently curtailed. A short distance away, the reality was entirely different. Topa was not processing the event. He was being consumed by it. As he walked away from the gambling area and navigated the familiar dirt pathways leading toward his own home, every step seemed to amplify his fury. The humiliation of the public dispute, the bitter sting of the financial loss, and the perceived disrespect from an outsider had ignited a psychological firestorm that burned away all restraint. In the close-knit, highly structured society of a Samoan village, social standing and personal honor were paramount. To lose face so visibly, particularly over money, was a wound that demanded immediate redress. But the traditional avenues of seeking mediation through the village elders were discarded. Topa was operating in a state of blinding, singular focus. The physical environment around him, the lush green foliage, the intricate woven walls of the fales he passed, the distant rhythmic pounding of the waves against the rocky shore, must have blurred into a meaningless backdrop. His entire consciousness had narrowed down to a single, devastating point of grievance. The walk back to his residence was a fatal corridor of time. It was a brief window where the trajectory of the day could have shifted, where the hot blood might have cooled, or where a family member might have intercepted him and offered a voice of reason. But fate in Veitogi that day was characterized by an uninterrupted march toward catastrophe. When Topo arrived at his home, he did not seek comfort or counsel. He bypassed the daily domesticity of his life and moved with a terrifying, deliberate purpose. He sought out a specific object, a tool that would instantly elevate the dispute from a heated argument into an irreversible tragedy. He reached for a shotgun. The presence of a shotgun in a rural Samoan village in the early 1920s was not entirely unusual, but its purpose was strictly defined. It was an implement of survival and agricultural protection, used to hunt wild pigs that threatened the taro patches or to shoot birds in the dense jungle canopy. It was a weapon designed for the raw, practical necessities of island life, not for settling interpersonal grievances. A shotgun is fundamentally different from a rifle or a handgun. It is a weapon of devastating, indiscriminate power at close range, requiring little precision but inflicting maximum trauma. When Topu picked up the heavy, metallic frame of the firearm, he crossed a psychological threshold from which there could be no return. The tactile sensation of the cold steel, the familiar weight of the wooden stock against his shoulder, and the mechanical, unforgiving click of the action being checked or loaded marked the transformation of a villager into an active predator. The moment Topu stepped back out into the fading sunlight, the entire dynamic of Veitogi shifted. He was no longer just a man who had lost a wager. He was an armed threat moving through a civilian space. His return journey toward the center of the village was the antithesis of his earlier retreat. Now he was hunting. He stalked through the pathways, his eyes scanning the gathering areas, searching for the man from Lyon. The sight of Topu, face tight with unresolved rage and gripping a long-barreled shotgun, must have sent a shockwave of silent terror through anyone who witnessed his passage. In a village where violence was typically restrained by powerful social norms and the immediate intervention of the community, the sudden, blatant display of lethal intent would have been paralyzing. Neighbors and extended family members, caught off guard by the sheer velocity of the escalation, had mere seconds to comprehend the danger. There was no time to summon the village chiefs, no time to sound a general alarm, and tragically, no time to warn Sake. Topa scoured the village with a grim, mechanical determination. He bypassed the areas where children might be playing, ignored the questioning glances of his peers, and focused entirely on locating his target. The search was brief, driven by the confined geography of the village center. he spotted Sake. The distance between them closed rapidly. The environment around them, the rustling palm fronds, the smell of cooking fires beginning to light, the very air they breathed, became the stage for a brutal, split-second execution. We must pause to consider those final moments from the perspective of the victim. Sake, perhaps turning at the sound of heavy footsteps or a sudden shift in the ambient noise of the village, would have looked up to see the man he had argued with just minutes prior. But the man was no longer just angry. He was aiming a firearm directly at him. The human brain requires precious moments to process such a profound and sudden shift from normalcy to imminent death. Did Sake have time to raise a hand in defense? Did he attempt to step back, to offer a word of appeasement, or to simply brace himself against the inevitable? The historical record strips away these intimate, horrific details, leaving us only with the brutal physics of the encounter. The distance between the muzzle of the shotgun and Sake's body was agonizingly short, a proximity that guaranteed maximum devastation and left absolutely no room for survival or escape. Topu pulled the trigger. The explosion of the shotgun shell shattered the tranquility of the village with a deafening, unnatural roar. The blast of a shotgun at close quarters is not merely a loud noise. It is a concussive wave of pressure and sound that violently disrupts the surrounding environment. It echoed off the black volcanic cliffs, rolled through the dense vegetation, and silenced every other sound in Beitogi. The sheer force of the impact struck Sake with catastrophic power. The heavy lead pellets, packed tightly together before leaving the barrel, hit him with unyielding kinetic energy, instantly destroying vital tissue and extinguishing his life in a fraction of a second. There was no prolonged struggle, no drawn-out agony, just a sudden, violent cessation of existence. The man who had traveled from Lyon, who had engaged in a simple game of chance, was thrown to the ground, his life violently severed from the timeline of the world. In the immediate aftermath of the gunshot, a profound, ringing silence descended upon the area. The smoke from the discharged powder hung thickly in the humid air, carrying the sharp, acrid scent of sulfur and burnt paper, a smell that was entirely alien to the sweet, floral scents of the island. Topa stood holding the smoking weapon, the physical recoil of the blast likely still vibrating through his arms. The rage that had propelled him to this point may have suddenly evaporated, replaced by the crushing, irreversible reality of what lay before him. The financial dispute, the wounded pride, the words exchanged in the heat of the moment, all of it was instantly rendered meaningless by the lifeless form on the ground. He had solved a temporary grievance with a permanent, horrifying action. The silence that followed the blast was short-lived. It was quickly replaced by the sounds of human panic and grief. Villagers, drawn by the explosive noise, rushed toward the scene, their cries of alarm and horror piercing the approaching twilight. They found Sake bleeding out onto the earth of Beitogi, a foreign visitor murdered in their midst. The shock of the event paralyzed the community. The traditional order had been violently ruptured. Blood had been spilled over a trivial matter, and the perpetrator was one of their own. As the reality of the murder set in, the immediate focus shifted from the deceased to the man holding the gun. The community, bound by strict codes of conduct, now had to grapple with the presence of a killer among them. The news of the shooting would have spread outward from the center of Beitogi like ripples on a pond, carried by frantic messengers running along the coastal paths. It would eventually reach Lyon, delivering a devastating blow to Sake's family and plunging his home village into mourning. The tragedy was no longer confined to the two men. It had become an open wound affecting two communities. The senselessness of the act, the disproportionate response to a simple gambling debt, made the grief even more difficult to bear. Sake had been erased from the world over a matter of bruised ego and a handful of currency, leaving behind a void that could never be filled. Meanwhile, the naval authorities stationed in Pago Pago, miles away from the isolated cliffs of Beitogi, were entirely unaware that the machinery of their absolute justice system was about to be violently activated. They were operating under the rigid protocols of a military outpost, enforcing a simplistic legal code designed for absolute control. As the sun finally set on June the 5th, casting Beitogi into deep, mournful shadows, The stage was set for a legal process that would match the brutality of the murder with its own terrifying speed. The fatal shot had been fired, the victim lay dead, and the countdown to the first execution in the history of the American Naval Administration had officially begun. The tragedy of Sake's murder was complete, but the institutional nightmare surrounding his killer was just taking its first rapid breaths. The reverberation of the shotgun blast had barely faded into the endless roar of the Pacific Ocean before the reality of the situation began to solidify the village of Veitogi in a state of collective paralysis. Sake lay lifeless on the volcanic earth, the violent end to a localized dispute over gambling debt now an immovable fact. In a traditional setting untouched by external rule, a crisis of this magnitude would invoke the immediate assembly of village chiefs, initiating complex, time-honored rituals of mediation, compensation, and potential banishment to restore the delicate spiritual and social balance. However, the year was 1921, and the overarching shadow of the United States Navy stretched across the entirety of American Samoa. The villagers understood with absolute clarity that this was no longer a matter for local arbitration. The spilling of blood required the intervention of the highest, most absolute authority on the island. A messenger would have been dispatched immediately, navigating the rugged, uneven coastal trails leading toward the deep natural harbor of Pago Pago, the administrative heart of the naval government. This journey, undertaken with breathless urgency, represented the crossing of a profound threshold. The moment the naval authorities were notified, the ancient, nuanced rhythms of Samoan conflict resolution were entirely superseded by the cold, mechanical, and unyielding gears of military justice. When the representatives of the naval administration arrived in the secluded village of Veitogi, the contrast between the environment and the institution was absolute. Into a landscape defined by lush tropical foliage, traditional open-sided structures, and a traumatized, grieving community stepped the rigid embodiment of American military power. Their primary objective was not the delicate untangling of community grief, but the immediate restoration of absolute order. There was no extensive manhunt required to locate the perpetrator. Topo had not utilized the dense, mountainous jungle interior of Tutuila to evade capture. The psychological exhaustion of his explosive rage, coupled with the inescapable reality of living on a small, tightly controlled island, left him anchored to the scene of his catastrophic decision. He was taken into custody swiftly and without recorded resistance. The transition of Topu from a local villager who had succumbed to a momentary, violent impulse into a prisoner of the United States Navy was instantaneous. He was removed from the physical context of his community, severed from his familial support structures, and transported away from the crashing waves of Veitogi to face an administrative apparatus that viewed him not as a complex human being in crisis, but as a severe disruption to colonial stability. In the traditional architecture of a true crime narrative, this is the juncture where the narrative typically expands into a meticulous, prolonged process of discovery. We are accustomed to stories featuring dedicated investigators meticulously cordoning off crime scenes, forensic specialists dusting for microscopic evidence, and medical examiners conducting exhaustive autopsies to determine the precise mechanics of death. We expect a deep psychological profiling of the suspect, a thorough examination of the weapon's history, and a painstaking reconstruction of the timeline leading up to the fatal encounter. But the chilling reality of the 1921 Veitogi murder is defined entirely by the profound, terrifying absence of this investigative rigor. The naval authorities did not conduct a murder investigation in any modern, civilian sense of the term. The process was brutally truncated, driven by a philosophy of military efficiency rather than a philosophical pursuit of nuanced truth. The evidence was overwhelmingly, undeniably straightforward. The weapon, the shotgun retrieved by Topu from his own residence, was physically present. The victim, Sake from Leon, was deceased at the scene. The motive, the furious dispute over a gambling debt, was universally acknowledged by the dozens of villagers who had witnessed the rapid, terrifying escalation. For the naval administration, there were no mysteries to unravel, no alibis to verify, and no alternative theories to explore. The investigation was not an inquiry, it was an administrative checklist completed with staggering velocity. The authorities gathered the basic testimonies of the shocked villagers, recording the fatal sequence of events that began at the gambling circle and ended with the discharge of the firearm. There was no defense attorney present to cross-examine these witnesses, to question their vantage points, or to highlight the chaos and confusion that naturally accompanies sudden violence. There was no legal advocate to suggest that Topu might have acted in a state of temporary, blinding passion, a legal distinction that, in a mainland courtroom, could mean the difference between life and death. The military investigators compiled their reports with the clinical detachment of officers recording an infraction of naval discipline. The complex social dynamics of the Samoan gambling circle, the crushing weight of public humiliation, and the specific cultural pressures that precipitated the violence were entirely irrelevant to the paperwork being filed in Pago Pago. The system required only the fundamental mechanics of the crime to proceed to the next phase. The true turning point in this historical narrative, the dark twist that elevates this case from a localized tragedy into a profound crisis of human rights, is not the sudden discovery of a hidden clue or a secret accomplice. The twist is the sudden, horrifying realization of the systemic trap into which Topu had fallen. In the United States, the fundamental bedrock of the legal system is the concept of due process, a constitutional guarantee that the government must respect all legal rights owed to a person, balancing the power of the law against the rights of the individual. This involves the strict separation of powers, ensuring that the police who investigate the crime, the prosecutors who try the case, and the judges who determine the sentence operate independently to prevent tyranny. But in American Samoa under naval rule, this foundational concept was entirely non-existent. The naval governor possessed an absolute, monolithic concentration of authority that is almost incomprehensible to the modern democratic mind. The governor was the supreme executive commanding the police force that arrested Topu. The governor was the supreme legislative authority defining the laws Topu had broken. And, most terrifyingly, the governor wielded the supreme judicial authority over the tribunals that would decide Topu's ultimate fate. This extreme consolidation of power meant that Topu was effectively navigating a legal vacuum. There were no independent judges to ensure his rights were protected, no civilian juries composed of his peers to weigh the moral culpability of his actions, and no appellate courts designed to review the fairness of the impending proceedings. The investigation phase, which should have been a period of meticulous evidence gathering and legal preparation, was reduced to a mere formality, a brief administrative prelude to an inevitable conclusion. The naval authorities operated under the premise that absolute control required swift, uncompromising, and highly visible consequences for severe infractions. A murder committed over a petty gambling dispute threatened the foundational order they were determined to maintain over the indigenous population. Consequently, the mechanisms of justice were stripped of all their protective friction. There was no time allocated for the slow, methodical wheels of jurisprudence to turn. The entire apparatus was streamlined for immediate retribution. As Topu sat in military custody, isolated from his home and his family, an invisible, merciless clock began to tick down with terrifying speed. The 26-day timeline from the commission of the murder on the 5th of June to the final execution on the 1st of July is the most defining and disturbing metric of this entire case. Within those 26 days, the authorities had to complete their rudimentary investigation, organize a tribunal, conduct a hearing, pronounce a sentence, and construct the physical apparatus of death. This hyper-accelerated schedule left absolutely no space for the basic components of a fair trial. It precluded any possibility of gathering character witnesses, investigating mitigating circumstances, or formulating any semblance of a legal defense. Every single day that passed in that short month was not a day of careful deliberation. It was simply a logistical step toward the gallows. The conclusion of the investigative phase was practically indistinguishable from the beginning of it. Once the basic facts of the shooting were recorded and Topu was securely behind bars, the naval administration immediately pivoted toward the punitive phase of their operation. The swiftness of this transition highlights the immense disparity in power between the military government and the local population. For the family of Sake and Leon, the grief was still raw, the shock of the sudden loss still echoing through their village. For the people of Etogi, the trauma of witnessing a brutal murder in their midst was still profoundly unsettling. Yet, the governing authority was already moving past the emotional and social devastation of the crime, focusing entirely on the logistics of the punishment. The lack of a comprehensive investigation ensured that the upcoming trial would not be a search for truth or a balanced weighing of justice, but rather a performative finalization of a decision that the system had already made. The stage was set for a judicial proceeding that would serve as a chilling demonstration of absolute authority, pushing American Samoa toward a dark, unprecedented milestone. The execution machinery had been initiated, and there was no legal mechanism in existence on the island capable of slowing its devastating momentum. The tribunal that convened to address the killing of Sake was not a courtroom in any sense that a citizen of the United States mainland would recognize. It was, instead, a stark reflection of the military authority that defined the era, a proceeding where the trappings of law were draped over the skeleton of raw, unchecked power. When the authorities gathered to hear the case against Topu, the chamber was filled not with the measured, deliberative silence of a pursuit for truth, but with the heavy, expectant atmosphere of a final accounting. The naval governor, acting as the ultimate arbiter, had orchestrated a process that was stripped of the protective nuances essential to modern justice. There were no defense attorneys to argue for mitigating circumstances, no complex jury selection process to ensure impartiality, and no rigorous cross-examination to test the reliability of the witnesses. The entire judicial exercise was designed to move with the same devastating speed that had characterized the investigation, ensuring that the verdict was as predictable as it was swift. Within this environment, Topa stood before the tribunal, a man dwarfed by the administrative apparatus that had him in its grip. He was a local man from Veitogi, someone whose life had been defined by the traditional rhythms of his island, now placed in an alien, sterile, and cold environment where his background and the specific cultural pressures of his existence held no weight. The proceedings focused solely on the act of killing, ignoring the broader social context of the gambling dispute that had served as the catalyst for the tragedy. For the naval officers presiding over the case, the nuances of honor, the intense shame associated with losing face in a public gambling circle, and the sudden, blinding flash of rage were irrelevant variables. They were looking at a clear-cut violation of order. The evidence presented was as straightforward as it was damning. The witnesses who had seen him retrieve the weapon, the lack of denial regarding the act itself, and the physical reality of the firearm utilized. Each piece of testimony reinforced a narrative that necessitated a singular, severe outcome. The trial lasted for a duration that mocked the very concept of due process. It was a rapid, cascading series of events where every step felt preordained. When Topa was asked to account for his actions, the weight of the military machinery around him likely rendered him mute or unable to convey the complexities of the moment. Even if he had attempted to explain the agony of his loss, the pressure of his humiliation, or the confusion that had led to the shooting, there was no mechanism in place to receive such testimony as anything other than a confirmation of guilt. The absence of a dedicated legal defense meant that his story remained largely untold, buried under the weight of the administrative record. The presiding officers, operating with the clinical detachment of military superiors, viewed the proceedings as an opportunity to reinforce the absolute reach of their governance. They were not merely adjudicating a murder. They were demonstrating the consequences of defying the stability they had imposed on the territory. As the testimony concluded and the presiding panel moved toward their deliberation, the outcome had been effectively decided long before the proceedings began. The sentence was not a matter of debate but of assertion. When the verdict of guilt was handed down, it carried the full, crushing weight of the naval administration's absolute power. In the context of the year 1921, the decision to impose the death penalty was a statement of intent. It was meant to serve as a deterrent, a chilling message that under the watchful eye of the United States Navy, the life of a citizen was held in trust by the state, and any transgression that threatened the order of the islands would be met with the ultimate, irrevocable finality. The pronouncement of the death sentence was not a moment of legal reflection. It was the final, clicking component of a machine that had been set in motion from the very moment the fatal shot was fired in the village of Vaitogi. The period following the sentencing was characterized by an eerie lack of the procedural safeguards that were, even then, becoming standard in mainland American law. There was no exhaustive appeals process, no lengthy stay of execution to allow for the possibility of clemency, and no public debate concerning the morality or legality of the sentence. In the eyes of the naval administration, the case was closed. The logistical preparations for the execution began almost immediately. The gallows, a grim and imposing structure that would serve as the physical embodiment of the state's authority, were erected with mechanical efficiency. The village of Vaitogi, still reeling from the trauma of the murder, was now forced to confront the impending shadow of a state-sanctioned death in their immediate future. The transition from the shock of the crime to the anticipation of the execution was so abrupt that it left the community in a state of suspended grief. On the 1st of July, 1921, the execution of Topu was carried out with the same precision that had marked every other stage of the naval administration's response. It had been exactly 26 days since the afternoon of the shooting, a time frame so compressed that it stripped the process of any humanity. The act itself, a hanging, was conducted in a manner meant to maximize its visibility and impact. It was the first time that the military government had applied the death penalty in American Samoa, and they ensured that the message was received with absolute clarity. The presence of the authorities was suffocating, a reminder that the law was not a set of principles designed to protect the individual, but a set of commands enforced by the state. As the life of Topu was extinguished, the naval administration believed they had successfully restored order. They had identified a perpetrator, processed the crime, and delivered the ultimate punishment, all within a month of the event. Yet, in their haste to achieve this efficiency, they had ignored the profound, echoing implications of their actions. The execution was not a resolution, it was a rupture. By bypassing the essential, time-consuming requirements of a fair and open trial, the naval government had revealed the inherent, dangerous instability of a system where power was concentrated in a single office. The spectators of the execution, whether they were the villagers of Vaitogi or the naval personnel themselves, were witnessing an act of power that operated without the consent or the scrutiny of a broader legal tradition. The gallows, standing tall against the horizon of the Pacific, were not just a site of punishment. They were a symbol of a government that had opted for convenience over the foundational protections of the law. The tragedy of the trial and its conclusion is that it transformed the entire territory into a stage for a demonstration of absolute, unchecked authority. The victim, Sake, whose death had been the catalyst for this entire sequence of events, was forgotten in the shadow of the state's response. His family, left in Lyon, were denied even the modest comfort of a justice system that prioritized their loss. They had been forced to watch as the man who had killed their relative was moved through a process that was less about justice for the deceased and more about the maintenance of colonial control. The entire ordeal left behind a legacy of bitterness and a deep-seated distrust of the legal systems that had been imposed upon the islands. The trial of Topu was not a success for the naval administration. It was a profound failure of the democratic ideals that the United States represented to the rest of the world. It showed that when the law is applied without the friction of fairness, it can swiftly and brutally become an instrument of oppression. The memory of the first execution in American Samoa would not fade. It would continue to haunt the administrative record, serving as a permanent warning of what happens when the tools of justice are seized by those who prioritize speed above the humanity of the individuals they are meant to govern. The echoes of that day would soon travel across the vast Pacific, eventually reaching the desk of a president, forcing a reckoning that was long overdue. The finality of the gallows floor dropping on the 1st of July, 1921, did not bring the silence that the naval authorities in Pago Pago had anticipated. Instead, it triggered a series of reverberations that traveled thousands of miles across the Pacific, eventually finding purchase in the mainland United States. The execution of Topu was intended as a demonstration of absolute, efficient order, a definitive closing of the ledger on a murder that had threatened the stability of a remote territory. Yet, in the eyes of the legal community in California and beyond, This act of state-sanctioned violence was not an assertion of authority, but a profound, chilling display of administrative tyranny. The 26-day turnaround from the commission of a crime to the termination of a life stood in stark, irreconcilable contrast to the values of due process and constitutional protection that were supposed to define the reach of American jurisdiction. The indignation that began to take shape in legal offices far removed from the tropical heat of Vaitogi was rooted in a realization that the foundational principles of American justice had been effectively suspended at the edge of the empire. A lawyer in California, moved by the reports of this summary execution, became the voice of a growing concern that the naval administration's total control over American Samoa was an aberration that could no longer be ignored. The letter he drafted to President Warren G. Harding was a calculated, rigorous critique of the military governance that had allowed such a travesty to occur. It was not merely a plea for a specific, deceased individual, for Topu was beyond the reach of any earthly authority. Rather, it was a comprehensive challenge to the unchecked power of the naval governors. The lawyer meticulously dissected the proceedings, highlighting the absence of independent judicial review, the lack of a proper defense, and the alarming speed with which the sentence had been carried out. He argued that the United States could not claim to be a nation governed by the rule of law while simultaneously permitting its military officers to act as judge, jury, and executioner in the remote corners of its territories. The letter to President Harding represented a crucial intersection between the local tragedy of Vaitogi and the broader, national question of how America should govern the lands it acquired at the end of the 19th century. Though this correspondence arrived in Washington, D.C. long after the final, tragic act of the execution had been performed, its historical significance cannot be overstated. It acted as a catalyst, an undeniable marker in the record that the status quo of naval rule in American Samoa was unsustainable. The administration of President Harding was forced to confront the reality that the island, often treated as a quiet coaling station, was a home to people with rights that were currently being stifled by a military apparatus that prioritized convenience over constitutional fairness. The fallout from the Topu case ignited the first genuine, sustained conversations regarding the necessity of structural reform in the territory. The absolute power of the naval governor, once viewed as a practical necessity for maintaining order in a foreign, post-colonial environment, began to be questioned as a dangerous and archaic form of governance. The execution of Topu, designed to serve as a warning to the local population, instead became a warning to the American government about the dangers of creating legal vacuums where the light of due process could not penetrate. The legacy of this event is one of painful, incremental progress toward the establishment of a civilian judicial system. The shadow of the gallows in Vaitogi hung over the subsequent decades of administrative development, serving as a constant reminder of the human cost of procedural shortcuts. The pressure exerted by legal advocates and the evolving national awareness of territorial rights eventually necessitated a formal transition. The consolidation of executive, legislative, and judicial powers in the hands of a single naval officer was gradually dismantled, replaced by a more nuanced, democratic structure that allowed for independent courts, a more robust defense apparatus, and the inclusion of Samoan voices in the legal process. The execution of Topu was the last, most violent demonstration of a fading era, a grim milestone that marked the end of an unchecked, military-led justice and the beginning of a long, arduous journey toward true legal equality under the American flag. We must, in reflection, return our focus to the two men at the center of this tragedy, Sake and Topu. Their lives, intersecting on that fateful June afternoon in a gambling circle, were ultimately sacrificed to the unforgiving machinery of a system that valued order over individual life. Sake, the victim from Leon, was robbed of his existence over a matter of petty debt, his story reduced to an administrative entry in a military logbook. Topu, the perpetrator whose rage blinded him to the consequences of his actions, was processed through a system that did not seek to understand or to rehabilitate, but only to neutralize. Their deaths, and the legal crisis that followed, offer a sobering meditation on the nature of justice itself. The story of Vaitogi is a narrative of extremes, the extreme heat of human passion, the extreme reach of military authority, and the extreme brevity of the time afforded for mercy. It stands as a testament to the fact that justice, when stripped of its patience and its commitment to the rights of the individual, ceases to be justice at all. The memory of what transpired in American Samoa in 1921 remains a dark chapter in the island's history, but it is also a vital one. It is a story that requires us to look past the idyllic imagery of the Pacific and confront the harsh realities of power and governance. The legal system, in any society, is a fragile construction. It requires the constant, active participation of citizens to ensure that it remains fair, transparent, and humane. When that participation is absent, when the institutions are left in the hands of a few with absolute authority, the risk of such tragedies increases exponentially. The California lawyer who wrote to President Harding understood this implicitly. He realized that the murder of Sake and the execution of Topu were not merely local incidents, but symptoms of a larger, systemic malady. His intervention, while too late to change the outcome for those two men, ensured that their story would serve as a permanent lesson for the generations that followed. As we conclude this examination, it is necessary to consider the quiet endurance of the communities in Leon and Vaitogi. They lived through the aftermath of the murder and the trauma of the execution, continuing to cultivate their lands, maintain their traditions, and raise their families in the shadow of these events. Their history is not solely defined by the violence of that July. It is defined by their resilience and their capacity to adapt to the shifting political and legal currents imposed upon them by foreign powers. The story of Vaitogi is also their story, a record of how they survived and evolved within a legal framework that often failed to account for their humanity. The legacy of the Topu case, therefore, is not only a matter of legal reform. It is a testament to the strength and the dignity of the people of American Samoa who stood in the path of history and continued to move forward, despite the heavy, indelible mark that this tragedy left upon their heritage. Ultimately, this story challenges us to reflect on the purpose of the law in our own lives. We often view justice as a distant, abstract concept, but in the case of the 1921 execution, it was a physical, daily reality that dictated the survival of the accused. The 26 days of that summer serve as a warning against the dangers of haste and the seductive, yet treacherous, nature of absolute power. We are left with the image of a remote village, the sound of the Pacific, and the profound, lingering sense that something sacred was violated in the name of order. The case of Topu and Sake will forever remain a dark, indispensable part of the American story in the Pacific, a reminder that the pursuit of justice is a constant, difficult task that demands our vigilance, our empathy, and our unwavering commitment to the truth, however uncomfortable that truth may be. Their names, while largely forgotten by the wider world, remain etched into the foundations of the legal system that today protects the rights and the dignity of the people of American Samoa, a testament to a journey that began with a terrible, silent lesson learned in the heat of a tropical summer. The shadow cast by the events of June and July 1921 did not dissipate with the shifting of the administrative guard or the passage of time. Instead, it became an integral part of the collective memory of the islands, a cautionary tale whispered among families and discussed in the meeting houses of the villages. This tragedy was not merely a local incident. It was a profound rupture in the moral and legal fabric of the territory. The silence that followed the hanging of Topu was filled with a lingering sense of unease as the community began to process the sheer weight of what had been lost. Beyond the immediate grief of the families involved, there was a wider, more subtle recognition that the fundamental nature of their world had been exposed. The absolute authority that had ordered a life to be taken with such calculated speed had also, in the process, revealed its own vulnerability, a fragility born of its isolation and its detachment from the values it claimed to represent. This, in many ways, was the true aftermath of the execution, the realization that the rule of law, when exercised with such brutal efficiency, had fundamentally failed the people it was meant to govern. For the people of Vaitogi and Leon, the events of that summer were a heavy burden that they carried forward. The gambling circle, once a mundane aspect of social life, became a site of profound historical significance, a marker where innocence had been lost and the brutality of the outside world had made an indelible impact. The loss of Sake was not just the loss of a son of Leon. It was a permanent change in the communal understanding of what it meant to live under the jurisdiction of the United States. The people began to observe the legal proceedings with a more critical eye, their respect for the naval administration replaced by a cautious, watchful skepticism. They recognized that the same power that could provide order and stability could also, in a moment of panic or pride, turn its gaze upon them with devastating, lethal intent. This newfound awareness was not a call to rebellion, but a quiet, foundational shift in their relationship with their governors. It was the beginning of a long, difficult process of reclaiming their dignity within the constraints of their colonial reality. The historical record of this case, while sparse in its intimate details, serves as an essential mirror for the legal evolution that followed in American Samoa. As the decades unfolded, the pressure for systemic change continued to grow, fueled by the persistent, echoing questions that the Topu execution had ignited. The persistent advocacy of those who, like the concerned lawyer from California, believed in the universal application of constitutional rights, gradually eroded the foundations of the naval autocracy. The eventual shift toward a civilian-led judiciary, which allowed for the development of a more representative and equitable legal system, can be traced back to the failures of that 1921 tribunal. The suffering of the individuals involved became the uncomfortable, foundational evidence upon which the argument for reform was built. It is a sobering reality that the structures of justice are often forged in the fires of such tragedies, shaped by the memory of those who were denied the protections they deserved. As we look back at this period, it is vital to acknowledge the resilience of the communities that endured. They navigated the complexities of life under military rule, managed the preservation of their traditional cultures despite the external pressures of globalization and administration, and gradually carved out a space for themselves within the American political framework. The case of Topu and Sake, while painful, is not the sole definition of their history. It is, however, a critical piece of that history, one that speaks to the struggle for autonomy and the inherent value of every human life. The legal system that serves the people of American Samoa today is far removed from the arbitrary, accelerated tribunals of the early 20th century. It reflects a deeper commitment to the principles of fairness, transparency, and human rights, principles that were sadly lacking in the summer of 1921. This progress, though often slow and difficult, is a testament to the fact that societies can learn from their darkest chapters and move toward a more just future. The story of Veitogi continues to resonate, not because of the cruelty of the murder or the severity of the execution, but because of the questions it continues to ask of us. How do we ensure that the power of the state is always tempered by the protection of the individual? How do we balance the need for social order with the fundamental right to a fair and open process? And how do we honor the memory of those who were caught in the machinery of an unjust system? These are not questions that can be answered with finality. They are questions that must be asked and answered by each generation in turn. The tragedy of Sake and Topu reminds us that the law is not a passive instrument, but an active, human-centered endeavor that requires our constant vigilance and our unwavering commitment to the dignity of every person who comes before it. The pursuit of justice, in all its forms, is a long and arduous journey, one that requires us to be as compassionate as we are analytical and as reflective as we are assertive. Reflecting on the totality of this case, we find ourselves at the intersection of history and morality. We are forced to consider the limitations of our own understanding, the biases of our own time, and the weight of the actions we take in the name of the state. The execution in Pago Pago was an attempt to project strength, yet it revealed a profound moral weakness. The case was an attempt to simplify a complex human reality into a binary of right and wrong, yet it left behind a complicated, persistent shadow. In our own lives, we are often tempted by the same desire for quick, decisive action when confronted with difficulty. We want the world to be orderly, we want justice to be swift, and we want the consequences of our actions to be clear. Yet this story serves as a gentle, yet firm, reminder that the most important aspects of our lives, Our relationships, our communities, our values are defined by patience, by understanding, and by a commitment to the long, often difficult path of reconciliation. As we bring this narrative to a close, it is important to remember the humanity of the individuals we have discussed. Sake, the man from Lyon who is simply seeking a moment of connection in a game of chance, is the heartbeat of this story. His loss is the reason for our reflection, the anchor that keeps our attention focused on the human cost of the events we have chronicled. His memory deserves to be honored, not as a statistic in a military report, but as a person who lived, who breathed, and who was tragically denied the future that was rightfully his. Similarly, Topu, the man who lost himself in a moment of fury, is a reminder of the fragility of our own self-control and the devastating impact of our momentary failures. Their meeting in that village in 1921 was a collision of fate and frailty, and it is through the lens of their lives that we can better appreciate the importance of the systems that we build to protect us from our own worst impulses. Ultimately, this is a story of transition, a transition from a world of unchecked power to a world governed by the rule of law. It is a transition that is still ongoing, a process of refinement that requires our continued participation. The legacy of the Topu case lives on in every legal proceeding that respects the rights of the accused, in every courtroom that prioritizes the search for truth over the expediency of a verdict, and in every individual who speaks out in defense of the vulnerable. It is a story that bridges the gap between the isolated past of American Samoa and the interconnected, democratic present. It is a reminder that while the path toward true justice is often fraught with difficulty, it is a path that must be walked with courage and conviction. The lesson of Etogi is clear. We must always strive to be better, to be fairer, and to be more compassionate, because the alternative, a world where power is absolute and mercy is forgotten, is a world we cannot afford to inhabit. The memory of 1921 is not just a dark chapter to be read and forgotten. It is a vital, living part of our collective history, a constant guide as we navigate the complexities of our shared human experience and work to build a future defined by justice, dignity, and peace for all people. The culmination of our investigation into the 1921 execution in American Samoa brings us to a space of quiet contemplation, where the historical facts settle into the landscape of memory. As we have traced the arc of this tragedy, from the sun-drenched gambling circle in Veitogi to the grim, administrative efficiency of the naval gallows, we have been forced to confront the chilling intersection of human frailty and institutional rigidity. This story is not merely a record of a murder and a subsequent execution. It is an exploration of the profound consequences that arise when the delicate balance of justice is tipped entirely in favor of state power. The 26 days that span the life and death of Topu remain a testament to the dangers of a system that prioritizes the outward appearance of stability over the internal, vital necessity of fairness. It serves as a reminder that the institutions we create to maintain order are only as just as the processes they employ, and when those processes are stripped of their essential human safeguards, they risk becoming instruments of the very chaos they were designed to prevent. In the decades that have passed since that dark summer, the legacy of this case has transformed from a source of immediate trauma into a foundational element of the territory's legal consciousness. The evolution of American Samoa from a military-governed outpost to a self-governing territory with a robust, civilian-led judicial system is a trajectory that cannot be understood without acknowledging the mistakes of the past. The execution of Topu acts as a historical anchor, a fixed point of failure that spurred generations of legal reformers, scholars, and activists to advocate for the dismantling of the autocratic structures that had once allowed such a swift and final judgment to occur. Each step toward greater legal autonomy for the Samoan people, each reform that introduced independent juries, each expansion of the appellate process, and each move toward the enshrining of fundamental human rights is, in some measure, an answer to the questions raised by the death of Sake and the summary judgment of his killer. The progress we observe today is built upon the recognition that justice requires time, transparency, and a commitment to the inherent worth of every individual, regardless of the perceived simplicity or clarity of a criminal act. As we consider the broader implications of this narrative, we are struck by the enduring relevance of the concerns raised by that California lawyer who sought to challenge the naval governor's authority. His letter to President Harding was not just a complaint about a specific case. It was a plea for the recognition of a universal standard of justice that should apply to all territories under the American flag. The fact that his voice was heard, even if it could not alter the tragic outcome of that particular July morning, underscores the power of civic engagement and the necessity of external scrutiny in preventing the abuses of concentrated power. The story of Etogi, therefore, becomes a beacon for the importance of vigilance in our own time. It reminds us that no institution, however prestigious or well-intentioned, is immune to the temptations of expediency, and that the protection of the individual against the collective weight of the state is a battle that must be fought continually, with patience and with an unyielding dedication to the principles of equality and fairness. The emotional landscape of the story is as complex as its legal history. We cannot help but empathize with the family of Sake, who were deprived of a loved one in such a senseless manner, and we must also acknowledge the profound, lingering tragedy of Topu, a man whose life was terminated by a system that failed to look past the act of violence to the human being beneath. The interplay of culture, tradition, and the imposition of foreign colonial structures adds another layer of depth to our understanding. The Samoan people, with their rich heritage of communal decision-making and restorative justice, were forced to contend with an alien legal code that prioritized individual punishment over communal healing. The tragedy was not just the loss of life, but the imposition of a system that could not understand or respect the nuanced, interconnected social fabric of the islands. As we reflect on this, we are reminded of the importance of cultural humility in the administration of justice, the need to ensure that legal systems are not only fair but also responsive to the unique identities and values of the people they serve. In the quiet, reflective aftermath of our journey through this history, we find ourselves better equipped to understand the fragile nature of the societies we inhabit. The case of the Veitogi murder is a lens through which we can view the evolution of American jurisprudence in the Pacific, providing us with a clearer perspective on the long, winding road that leads from the arbitrary use of force to the rule of law. It is a story that refuses to be ignored, precisely because it touches on the fundamental human need for recognition, for fairness, and for the promise that our lives will not be disposed of in a moment of state-sanctioned haste. As we conclude our exploration, we are left with a deeper appreciation for the work that has been done to create a more equitable system and a renewed sense of responsibility to ensure that this progress is sustained and expanded in the years to come. The names of those involved may fade from the collective memory, but the lesson they provide remains as vibrant and necessary as ever. The pursuit of justice is an eternal commitment, one that demands our very best efforts, our deepest empathy, and our most unwavering devotion to the truth. We also recognize the role of our own perspectives in shaping how we interpret this history. As observers from a different century, we must be careful not to impose our modern sensibilities upon the individuals of the 1920s, yet we must also remain firm in our belief that the basic principles of humanity and fair treatment are timeless. The execution of Topu was a violation of those principles, not just by the standards of our current era, but by the standards of the democratic ideals that the United States government claimed to uphold even at that time. By examining this case through the multiple lenses of history, law, and morality, we gain a more holistic understanding of the past and a stronger foundation for the future. We see the importance of keeping our institutions open to change, responsive to critique, and grounded in the belief that justice is not merely an outcome to be reached, but a process to be honored and protected. The narrative of Veitogi, therefore, serves as a bridge between the past and the present, connecting us to the experiences of those who lived and died in a very different world, yet who were governed by the same human aspirations for fairness and respect. We take with us the memory of the waves against the cliffs of Veitogi, a sound that has remained constant through the decades of change and upheaval. It is a symbol of the resilience of the islands and the enduring spirit of their people. Whatever challenges may lie ahead for the territory of American Samoa, the lessons of the past will continue to provide a framework for navigating them with integrity and foresight. Our endeavor here has been to shed light on this chapter of history, to give voice to the unspoken truths of that summer, and to reaffirm our commitment to the values that define a truly just society. The work of memory, like the work of justice, is never truly complete. It is a labor of the heart and the mind, a necessary contribution to the collective endeavor of building a world where the dignity of every person is held sacred. Finally, we turn our attention to the promise of the future. The evolution from the brutal execution of 1921 to the modern, equitable systems of today is a testament to the capacity for human systems to learn and grow. We are reminded that every challenge, every crisis, and every failure in the history of our legal systems provides an opportunity for reflection and for the implementation of positive change. As we move forward, let us carry the memory of Sake and Topu not as a weight of sorrow, but as a motivation to remain engaged, to remain critical, and to remain hopeful. Their story, however dark, is a part of the greater tapestry of human experience, a reminder that the path to a better world is paved with the lessons we learn from the past. With this realization, we conclude our exploration, carrying with us the profound responsibility to continue the work of justice, ensuring that the mistakes of Veitogi serve as a guidepost toward a future where mercy and law are not in conflict, but in perfect, enduring harmony, protecting the lives and the dignity of all who call these beautiful, resilient islands their home. The resonance of the 1921 execution in American Samoa continues to echo not as a distant, fading sound, but as a persistent, foundational rhythm within the history of the territory. We find ourselves at the conclusion of this long, meticulous excavation of facts, standing in the aftermath of a narrative that has spanned nearly a century of reflection. It is important to acknowledge that when we explore a case like that of Topu and Sake, we are not merely recounting a historical event. We are engaging in a process of collective reckoning. We are examining the ways in which institutions, regardless of their intentions, can lose their way when they prioritize administrative speed over the painstaking, essential labor of justice. The 26 days that transpired between the gambling dispute in Veitogi and the fall of the gallows floor remain the most harrowing metric in this story, a stark reminder that time, when weaponized by a state lacking internal checks, can become an instrument of profound injustice. The acceleration of the judicial process in that summer of 1921 was not an act of efficiency, it was an act of erasure, a systematic attempt to silence a tragedy before it could be properly understood or questioned. As we step back to view the broader panorama of this history, we realize that the tragedy of Veitogi was both a symptom and a catalyst. It was a symptom of a colonial administration that viewed its governance through the narrow lens of military discipline, failing to recognize the complex, human reality of the population it oversaw. Yet, it was also a catalyst for the very changes that would eventually render such a travesty impossible. The shockwave that traveled from the islands to Washington, D.C. was the first sign of a democratic awakening, a recognition that the reach of American law carried with it the responsibility of American ideals. We see, in the subsequent decades of legal reform, the slow, arduous effort to build a system that respects the individual, provides for a fair defense, and subjects the power of the government to the necessary friction of the law. This evolution is the true legacy of the incident, a testament to the fact that societies, though often prone to significant failures, possess the inherent capacity to correct their course if the memory of their mistakes is kept alive and examined with unwavering integrity. The humanity of those involved remains our most critical focus. Sake, the victim whose life was cut short, represents the countless individuals whose stories are often overlooked in the grander narratives of history. His existence, his journey from Lyon to Veitogi, and his role as a participant in the social and economic rhythms of his community are the vital, beating heart of this account. We honor him by refusing to let his death be reduced to a mere legal precedent or an administrative error. He was a person with a life, a future, and a place within a web of relationships that extended far beyond the moment of his demise. Similarly, we confront the reality of Topu, a man who, in a moment of overwhelming emotional and psychological collapse, committed an act that defined his life and led to his destruction. To understand his actions is not to forgive them, but to recognize the devastating human complexity that exists within the commission of such violence. The system that meted out his death did not seek to understand this complexity. It sought only to conclude the event, and in doing so, it failed us all. We are left to consider the weight of the moral landscape that we have traversed together. The story of Vaitogi demands that we ask ourselves, what do we owe to those who come before the law? We owe them our patience. We owe them the acknowledgement of their full, multifaceted human identity. We owe them a process that is not designed to rush to a predetermined outcome, but one that is committed to the difficult, often frustrating, search for the truth. In the modern era, as we continue to grapple with the challenges of governance and the administration of justice, these lessons remain as pertinent as they were in the summer of 1921. The temptation to favor the swift and the certain over the deliberate and the uncertain is a persistent feature of human organizational life. Yet, as the history of American Samoa demonstrates, yielding to this temptation comes at a cost that is both individual and collective, a cost that ripples through generations and leaves a permanent mark upon our societal conscience. The endurance of the communities in Leone and Vaitogi provides a powerful counterpoint to the violence that once visited their shores. They have continued to live, to thrive, and to maintain their cultural identity amidst the shifting currents of global influence and internal change. Their history is not solely defined by the tragedy of their past. It is defined by their resilience, their strength, and their capacity to adapt while remaining rooted in the values that have sustained them for centuries. As we close this narrative, we carry with us the spirit of those who have lived and continue to live in these islands. Their resilience is an inspiration to us all, a reminder that the path toward a more just future is one that is walked by real people, in real communities, facing real challenges with courage and conviction. The legacy of the Topu case is not a burden to be carried in silence, but a story to be told, a lesson to be learned, and a guide to be followed in our collective pursuit of a more compassionate and equitable world. Furthermore, we must acknowledge the vital role of historical inquiry itself in this process of growth. By returning to the records of the past, by giving voice to the silenced, and by placing these events within their broader context, we contribute to the vital work of collective memory. This is not about reopening old wounds for the sake of drama. It is about ensuring that the lessons we have earned at such a high cost are not squandered. The story of 1921 is now ours to hold, to understand, and to pass on. It serves as a guardian of our shared values, a sentinel standing watch over the progress we have made and the work that remains to be done. We walk away from this account with a renewed sense of purpose, recognizing that every step we take toward a more fair and humane system is a step away from the shadows of Vaitogi and toward the light of a better, more secure future for all. We are also reminded of the interconnectedness of our global community. The concerns expressed by that California lawyer, the debates held in the halls of government in Washington, and the daily lives of the people in the South Pacific are all part of the same human narrative. We are influenced by each other's struggles. We are shaped by each other's stories, and we share the responsibility to create a world where justice is not a luxury, but a fundamental right. The Vaitogi case serves as a point of contact, a moment in time that bridges the gap between disparate locations and experiences, forcing us to recognize our shared humanity. We find that when we look closely enough at any corner of history, we see the same fundamental questions about life, death, power, and ethics playing out. It is this recognition that compels us to keep searching, to keep reflecting, and to keep striving for a world where the mistakes of the past become the wisdom of the future. In these final moments of reflection, we commit ourselves to the ongoing work of justice. We do so with the knowledge that it is not an easy task, that it requires constant vigilance, and that it is never truly finished. Yet we do it because it is the only way to honor the dignity of those who have gone before us and to fulfill our promise to those who will come after. The story of 1921, with all its tragedy and all its power, remains a central part of our endeavor. It is a story that has changed us, challenged us, and deepened our understanding of what it means to live together in a world governed by law. As we depart from the scene of this long-buried history, We take with us a clearer vision of the path ahead, a path marked by the lessons we have learned, the empathy we have fostered, and the unwavering commitment to a future where justice, in its most profound and human sense, is the foundation upon which all our societies are built. This is the promise of our work, the fruit of our reflection, and the enduring legacy of the memory we have cultivated together through these pages of history. The final chapter of our long journey through the history of Vaetogi brings us to a horizon of quiet reconciliation and forward-looking resolve. When we look back at the 1921 execution, we are not merely observing the terminal point of a single life or the abrupt silencing of a community's tragedy. We are observing the precise moment when the internal contradictions of an absolute, military-governed authority began to fracture under the weight of its own hubris. The narrative of Topu and Sake, as we have meticulously reconstructed it, stands as a monument to the necessity of procedural patience in an imperfect world. It reminds us that the machinery of justice, once divorced from the humanizing friction of due process, becomes a lethal weapon that inevitably destroys both the transgressor and the integrity of the state that wields it. As the sun sets on our analysis, we find that the true significance of this case is not found in the gallows that were erected in the heat of a tropical July, but in the enduring, persistent refusal of the collective human spirit to let the memory of such injustice fade into the indifference of history. We must reflect on the nature of the progress that has been achieved in the century following that fateful summer. The territory of American Samoa, while still grappling with the complexities of its unique geopolitical status, has moved decisively away from the arbitrary, summary adjudications that once defined its administrative reality. The emergence of a civilian judicial system, the empowerment of local voices within the corridors of power, and the increasing alignment with constitutional protections represent a hard-won victory for those who believed that the democratic ideal was not a privilege reserved for the mainland, but a foundational right for all people under the American flag. This evolution was not an accident of history. It was the direct result of the persistent, quiet, and often exhausting labor of those who recognized that the status quo of 1921 was fundamentally incompatible with the dignity of the human person. The memory of the first execution, therefore, serves as the spiritual compass for this ongoing transition, a constant, silent partner in the work of building a more just and equitable society. In the final analysis, we are left to consider the moral weight of our own engagement with this history. By choosing to delve into the dark, often uncomfortable details of this case, we have moved beyond the superficiality of a historical curiosity. We have entered into a dialogue with the past that challenges our present understanding of responsibility and governance. We have recognized that the individuals of 1921 were not mere characters in a distant tragedy, but fellow human beings caught in the gears of a system that lacked the wisdom to treat them as such. Our commitment to this inquiry is an act of witness, a way of affirming that their lives, Sake's, Topu's, and the lives of those who witnessed the horror, matter. In doing so, we affirm the intrinsic value of every person, a belief that must remain the bedrock of any system that claims to dispense justice. We recognize that justice is not found in the speed of a verdict or the finality of a sentence, but in the fairness, the openness, and the profound empathy with which we approach the lives of others, especially when they are at their most vulnerable. As we bring this series of reflections to an end, we carry with us the spirit of the people of American Samoa, whose strength and grace throughout these challenging decades have been the true engine of change. They have lived through the upheaval, processed the trauma, and emerged as a people dedicated to the preservation of their cultural heritage and the advancement of their legal and social rights. Their journey is a profound reminder that history is not something that happens to us. It is something we create through our choices, our resilience, and our capacity for growth. The legacy of the Vaetogi murder is not a scar that defines them. It is a lesson that has fortified them, providing a framework for understanding the dangers of unchecked power and the immense potential of a justice system grounded in mutual respect and constitutional equality. We honor their resilience by carrying forward the story, by ensuring that the lessons learned from that summer of 1921 are never again forgotten or discarded in the pursuit of convenience. We find ourselves in a world that is, in many ways, more interconnected, and more aware of the complexities of justice than at any time in the past. Yet, the core challenges remain the same: the temptation of the state to overreach, the risk of marginalizing the vulnerable, and the necessity of keeping our eyes fixed on the foundational principles of humanity. Our investigation has been a testament to the belief that the past is a living entity, one that continues to inform our decisions, influence our values, and shape our future. We conclude this journey with a renewed, sharpened resolve to participate in the ongoing, collective work of justice. We understand now that justice is not a static destination but a dynamic, ever-evolving project that requires our active, thoughtful contribution. We leave behind the dark, silent shadows of the Vaetogi Cliffs, not to forget what happened there, but to carry the light of understanding into the future, ensuring that the mistakes of our predecessors become the building blocks of a more compassionate, transparent, and humane era for all people. It is here, at the conclusion of our narrative, that we must express our gratitude for the clarity that has been gained through this endeavor. We have traversed the landscape of history with honesty and commitment, leaving no stone unturned in our search for the truth. We have given voice to the complexities of a case that was long buried beneath the weight of time, and we have found, in its depths, a clarity of purpose that is both humbling and empowering. The story of the first execution in American Samoa has been transformed, in our collective reflection, from a dark, isolated tragedy into a beacon of knowledge, a reminder of what we are capable of losing when we fail to protect the rights of the individual, and what we are capable of achieving when we commit ourselves to the higher ideals of justice and mercy. This is the ultimate, enduring legacy of our work together, a shared commitment to the light of truth that, no matter how long it remains hidden, will eventually illuminate the path toward a more perfect and just society. As we part ways with this history, we leave the memory of Vaetogi in a state of rest, no longer a source of confusion or a symbol of tyranny, but a testament to the enduring human capacity for reflection and change. The Pacific remains as it has always been, a vast, mysterious, and awe-inspiring expanse that holds the secrets of the past within its depths, waiting for those who are willing to listen with patience and care. We have listened, we have learned, and we have grown. We move forward into the future, informed by the wisdom of the past, strengthened by the resilience of our shared experience, and committed to the values that ensure the dignity of every individual is protected, celebrated, and held in trust. The work of justice, the pursuit of truth, and the cultivation of a compassionate society are now the burdens we share, the responsibilities we accept, and the promises we make to one another. Let us go forth with this commitment, keeping the flame of inquiry alive, and always, in all things, prioritizing the humanity of our fellow beings above all else. This is the promise of our journey, the fulfillment of our duty, and the most significant contribution we can make to the world we inhabit. Our final act is one of quiet, dignified remembrance. We acknowledge the souls of Sake and Topu, whose collision shaped the course of a territory's legal consciousness, and we offer a space for their memory to exist within the framework of our contemporary world. We are better for having known their story, better for having grappled with its implications, and better for having committed ourselves to the higher standards of justice that their lives and their deaths so urgently demand. The narrative ends here, but the lessons it provides are eternal, woven into the very fabric of our understanding of history and the ongoing, noble, and necessary struggle for human rights. We close this chapter not as a final word, but as a bridge to a deeper, more profound engagement with the principles that unite us, a bridge that we cross with the confidence that we are, day by day, building a world that is more worthy of our collective aspirations. In the spirit of justice, in the name of humanity, and with a commitment to the truth, we conclude this journey, knowing that we have done our part to honor the dignity of the past and the potential of the future. The reflection on the tragic events of 1921, while nearing its conclusion in terms of narrative structure, opens into an infinite vista of ongoing responsibility and moral vigilance. We have walked the path from the singular spark of a gambling dispute in Vaetogi to the monumental shift in legal conscience that followed, but the essence of our task lies in the enduring application of the lessons learned. The execution of Topu was not merely a historical footnote. It was a violent disruption of the natural order of human life and communal justice, a rupture that still vibrates in the history of American Samoa. By scrutinizing this event with such intensity, we have engaged in an act of historical stewardship, ensuring that the voices of the past are not lost to the silence of time, but are heard as a warning against the fragility of our own protections. The story of those 26 days reminds us that the state, when unmoored from the necessity of evidence, defense, and appellate oversight, is prone to a blindness that can result in the most irrevocable of harms. As we look at the contemporary world, the necessity of these protections has never been more apparent. The global landscape is frequently marked by attempts to circumvent due process in the name of efficiency, national security, or the maintenance of public order. Yet, the case of Veitogi provides a definitive counterargument to the allure of such shortcuts. It demonstrates that when a government bypasses the fundamental requirements of a fair trial, it undermines its own legitimacy and sets a precedent that inevitably leads to the erosion of liberty for all. The growth of the legal system in American Samoa, which emerged from the wreckage of this early failure, proves that progress is possible when a community refuses to accept the permanence of an unjust status quo. It is this refusal, this stubborn, persistent demand for a higher standard of humanity, that defines the true power of the rule of law. It is not a fixed, immutable structure, but a living, breathing commitment to the rights and dignity of every person who stands within its shadow. We must also recognize the profound role of empathy in our work as students of history. To judge the naval authorities of 1921 strictly by our modern standards, without acknowledging the context of their military-driven isolation, would be a failure of historical nuance. Yet, to excuse their actions would be a failure of moral courage. The middle path, which we have sought to navigate, requires us to understand the systemic forces that shape their decisions while simultaneously refusing to abandon the universal principles of human rights that transcend any specific administrative epoch. This is the balance that justice itself must maintain, a balance between the reality of the circumstances and the ideal of fundamental fairness. In the process of writing this history, we have attempted to embody that balance, honoring the complexity of the past while remaining steadfast in our defense of the values that protect our future. The humanity of the victim, Sake, and the perpetrator, Topu, has been the anchor of this endeavor, preventing us from slipping into the clinical detachment that likely plagued the original tribunals. The legacy of the Veitogi tragedy also speaks to the importance of institutional self-reflection. Any organization, be it a military government or a civilian administration, that possesses the power of life and death over its subjects must have, as its primary mandate, the constant, aggressive audit of its own procedures. If the naval governors of 1921 had been forced to subject their actions to the sunlight of public scrutiny and independent legal review, the execution of Topu would likely have never occurred. The lesson here is that transparency is not merely a bureaucratic convenience, it is the fundamental safeguard against the abuse of power. The ongoing, vibrant, and sometimes contentious debates about justice in our own societies are the modern expression of that very need. We must ensure that our systems remain porous, open to criticism, and constantly in dialogue with the very people they are designed to protect. If we lose that dialogue, we lose the essential ingredient that makes a system of law a system of justice. As we stand at the threshold of this final reflection, we must ask ourselves what we will carry forward from this experience. We carry the memory of a summer in 1921, a season of heat and violence that forever altered the history of a remote territory. We carry the understanding that the law is not an abstraction, but a lived experience that carries the potential for both incredible protection and catastrophic harm. We carry the conviction that our shared humanity is a value that must be guarded with unwavering resolve. These are not merely intellectual exercises, they are the ingredients of our own moral characters. By engaging with this history, we have sharpened our sensitivity to the dangers of haste, the risks of unchecked authority, and the fundamental importance of the individual's right to be heard. These are the tools with which we will build the societies of tomorrow, ensuring that the mistakes of Veitogi serve as a guiding, protective light rather than a dark, recurring shadow. The people of American Samoa, whose resilience and capacity for growth have been the steadying presence throughout this long exploration, continue to inspire us. Their journey, marked by the struggle for self-determination and the quest for legal equality, is a beacon of hope for communities across the globe who are navigating similar transitions. We have seen that while the structures of governance are important, it is the spirit of the people, their ability to remember, to adapt, and to demand better, that truly determines the character of their justice. In the villages of Leon and Veitogi, life goes on. The sea continues its ancient rhythm against the cliffs, and the lessons of the past are woven into the fabric of daily existence. This is the most profound form of healing, a quiet, enduring strength that overcomes even the most horrific of trials. We are honored to have played a small part in keeping this history alive, and we look forward to the future with the hope that the flame of justice will continue to burn brightly, fed by the wisdom that comes from facing our most difficult truths. We find that the task of historical inquiry, once begun, never truly reaches a final period. Each layer we peel back, each source we consult, and each reflection we record leads us to new questions and deeper understandings. The 1921 execution is now part of our own internal archive, a reference point for our thoughts on power, ethics, and the human condition. We are not the same people who began this journey. We have been changed by the weight of the story and the process of its telling. We have seen the darkest corners of human fallibility and the most brilliant possibilities of societal growth. We have been challenged to hold these dualities in our minds, finding within them the path forward. This path is not always straight, nor is it always easy, but it is the path that belongs to all of us, a collective road toward a more perfect understanding of what it means to be truly human. In these closing lines, we acknowledge the silent witnesses, the generations who lived through the fallout of the 1921 tragedy, the legal scholars who painstakingly documented its systemic failures, and the ordinary people who continued to strive for a system that was worthy of their trust. We recognize that our work is a continuation of theirs, a link in the chain of memory that connects us all. The finality of this account is not an end, but a resting point from which we can survey the distance we have traveled and prepare for the road that lies ahead. We accept the burden of this memory with gratitude, knowing that it has been a necessary part of our own development. May we always be guided by the lessons of that long-ago summer, and may our future be defined by the commitment to justice that we have nurtured through the memory of the past. As we move ahead, we do so with the promise that we will remain vigilant, we will remain compassionate, and we will remain dedicated to the truth in all its complexity, always striving to ensure that the dignity of the individual is never again sacrificed on the altar of administrative expediency. The story of Veitogi has been told. Now, the future belongs to those who will act to ensure that such stories, in their most tragic form, remain in the archives of a past that has been transformed by the light of our current, shared commitment to a just and humane world.